Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. This is 5-Year Battle Agatha Christie. We are down to the final 8, and this is our first of 4 quarterfinals, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we have the first face off, I just want to remind you of the 8 books that have made their way to the final 8. Are these the 8 best Agatha Christie books? No, they're not, because some of these 5-year periods, I'm going to sit you down, guy, because you're clawy. Some of these 5-year periods have multiple books that probably deserve to be in the final 8. The mid to late 20s to the early 40s is an amazing period for Christie. So there are just a lot of books during that time period that do not make it. But I selected the best book of each 5-year period and had them go against each other. And last week I picked the 3 books of the, I will say, probably the bottom 6 for them to move onward. So we have a final 8. So we have a final 8 of And Then There Were None, The Man in the Brown Suit, The Mysterious Mr. Quinn, Death Comes as the End, Murder on the Orient Express, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side, Crooked House, and Endless Night. Now, I've mentioned previously a few surprising things in these selections is one, only one pro. There were 3 pros in the final 11, but the 2 other pro books got knocked out by the books they were facing. There's also a Miss Marple book, which is a bit surprising. And it's not even my favorite Miss Marple book, but my favorite Miss Marple book, which was The Murder at the Vicarage, was a Vic. No, you're not going to jump up. I'm going to put you down. Let's see if we can keep you stay down for a bit. The Murder at the Vicarage was in that period where there was just so many good books that despite being my favorite Miss Marple book, it got knocked out. There's also a surprise that the mysterious Mr. Quinn is in it merely because it is the only collection of short stories that is in this final 8. And another surprise, Death Comes as the End, because it's the only book that's not set in the 20th century. It is set in 2000 BC in Egypt. So we got a whole bunch of different books here. You are so needy. So, but we're going to go ahead and start with And Then There Were None and The Man in the Brown Suit. They're going to face off to see which one is going to take their spot in the final 4. So I'll start with, I'm going to put him down again. Let's see how long it takes. I'm going to go ahead and start with The Man in the Brown Suit. I mentioned before it was essentially a spy novel, which I have also mentioned. I'm not fond of with Christie. I don't think Christie does spy novels well. But I was also wrong in that it starts off as a typical type of spy novel with, international intrigue, characters from other countries talking about these goings on in a very confusing way. And I'll have to admit, that was my least favorite part of this novel. And I think, personally, at the end, I don't think it was really needed in the novel. I think you probably could have done it without it, but that's what I get anyways. But this is mainly told from the point of view of Anne, I want to get her last name right, Bedingfield. a young woman whose father has passed away. She has witnessed an accident, a man basically being run over, or he fell on a live, a man fell on a live track. Uh, she finds a note. I guess the doctor picked up a note that has information on it that leads her to a house. At that house, a woman is found dead, and a man in a brown suit is found leaving, and he is the primary suspect. She also finds a canister of film at the house and develops it, finds out information about what else is a note, what leads her to get on a ship, and her adventure continues. Some of the novel is also narrated by Sir Eustace. He provides a lot of the humor in the novel. I don't think Christie really gets a lot of credit for humor that she uses because generally humor is just not something she's known for, but she does sneak it in there every once in a while. And it's times like this where it's like, oh yeah, she can be funny. But uh, this is also the first appearance of Colonel Reyes, who will play a part in later works, especially working with Pro on some cases. So it's essentially not a spy novel, but a thriller, a crime novel, an adventure novel. It takes us to Africa, which when you see Christie going to Africa, that brings me back on my heels a little bit because then you have to face, oh, there may be some racism coming. And there is, but not the greatest thing to say, but it could have been worse. Honestly, the thing that I found hardest about this novel is the relationship between Anne and another character in the novel. He's, I would say, practically a Neanderthal, and she is really big into uh, that and being the submissive person dominated by this character. It doesn't happen in this novel, but it reminds me of another novel. It was a pro novel. I can't remember the name right off the top of my head, but a woman feels she realizes that a man really loves her because he tried to strangle her to death. And that this kind of reminds me of that. The whole romance thing, eh, eh. I actually generally like Anne as a character, although she can be. She's not a detective, and sometimes she just goes by instinct, and sometimes she's right, sometimes she's wrong. And it kind of reminds me, not that I'm quite old enough to remember these myself, but it reminds me of like those like serials that you would see at movie theaters, like before the actual movie started, like these little 5-minute serials where there'd be a cliffhanger and then you come back the next week to discover how the hero escaped that cliffhanger and go right into another one. And this kind of reminds me of that in a way. I generally like a lot of the characters. Like I said, I don't care for the male love interest. As far as crime, spy, thriller, whatever type of novel, I think this is probably one of my favorite ones that Christie has written. But it is going up against And Then There Were None, which is one of the top selling books of all time, the best selling mystery, like in the top 10 of all time for books. And that's including like the Bible, and I don't know what else is on there, but the Bible has sold a lot. Honestly, And Then There Were None is probably one of the best plotted mysteries that I have read. Uh, 8 people come to an island. Some of them hired by a UNON and his wife. They come there, and there are 2 people already on the island, a Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, who are the butler and the cook housekeeper. They are a married couple, and they play a phonograph recording that night that accuses all 10 people of having committed murder and gotten away with it. And soon after that, one of the 10 dies. Then the next day, another of the 10 dies. And they die in a method that's pretty similar to a essentially a nursery rhyme. In the book, oh, and then there were none. In the book that I have, in 10 Little Indians, I know at one point it's changed to like 10 Soldier Boys. Yeah, in the copy I have, it's like 10 Little Indian Boys, but as you can see from the yellowing, this is a very old copy. More recent copies have 10 Little Soldier Boys. The first printing of it had 10 Little, a different term that I will not say. So this one also has some racism in it, but it's mainly just centered around that nursery rhyme. Doesn't really have anything else to do with the rest of the novel. There is another area where you could say, yeah, there's some racism there. But if we're setting it like, okay, we're setting this is written, I believe this one was published in 1939. It's like 85 years ago or so. So don't forget the racism, but we kind of go, okay, at the time, and we look at the book on its own. And as I said, there's some racism in the man in the brown suit too. So I like a lot of this. I like how the murders happen. I I think I like how the murder is revealed, but I think the problem is that this was published in 1939. I didn't read my first Christie until sometime in the 80s, and I have read many, many mysteries since. And so the solution to this is something that I have kind of seen a lot, but it's not fair for me to necessarily judge this because this came before a lot of these books, and it kind of turned the mystery genre on its head a little bit. While I'm not overly pleased with the solution or the reveal, putting it in its place and time, it's like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, I've seen that a lot, but again, I'm just reading it long past when the book came out. I will also say, and I don't say this as a criticism, it's actually, I think, something that's fun to debate about. It's like, why were they killed in that order? The murderer has a reason why they're killed in that order based on what the murderer believes is their crime and the severity of it. It's so that the person with the worst crime is to be killed last, and the person with the most forgivable crime, I guess, is killed first. I have to say, I don't agree with the murderer's choice, but also that person is a murderer and I am not. So I would probably pick a different uh, order in which to kill people. And I will also say that I think there are a few in here. Well, I will say there are not that many likable characters in the book. I also don't necessarily think that at least a few of them are deserving of punishment. you could take this one to a philosophy class, I think, and just debate, the justice of what happens. I'm talking about the philosophy of "And Then There Were None." And The Man in the Brown Suit was a good book. Uh, yeah, this is one of the ones where it's like, yeah, I mean, we know what book I'm picking, but I like talking about the book, and I really do disagree with the order that people were killed in. And who, what order do you think they should have been killed in? Do you think that, not that they should have been killed, but do you think there are any of them that should not have been punished? But yeah, it's and then there were none. And then there were none is moving on to the final four. Pretty obvious pick. We will see in about 4 weeks whether or not it will move on to the final two. Will it be number one? Man in the Brown Suit is a good book. It's one of her earliest books, and it's a genre that I generally don't like from her, but barring a few minor stumbles in there and just Christieisms, it, I enjoyed it, but it just couldn't compare to the juggernaut that is. And then there were none. So next week we will be picking between The Mysterious Mr. Quinn and Death Comes as the End. Two very different books, different than any other books that are on this list. One collection of short stories, one set 2000 BC. It's going to be a fight. Please come back and see what happens. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I will talk to you next time.